The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had never seen such panic. 847 different alien species sat in their assigned seats, but today none of them felt safe. The usual calm discussions about trade routes and mining rights had been replaced by emergency meetings about survival. Zethkar adjusted his forearms nervously as he stood at the central podium. His blue skin had turned pale, something that happened when his people felt extreme fear. As the military coordinator for the council, he had delivered many reports about small conflicts between member worlds. Today was different. Today he had to tell the most powerful beings in the galaxy that they were losing a war they never thought they could lose. Council members, Zethkar began, his voice shaking slightly. The situation with the humans has grown worse than our worst predictions. A ripple of worried sounds filled the massive chamber. Some species clicked their claws. Others made low humming noises. The Xanthari representatives flapped their wing-like appendages in distress. Everyone knew this meeting was about the humans, but hearing it said out loud made it real. 3 years ago, humanity had seemed like a simple problem. These strange bipedal creatures from a small blue planet had applied to join the Galactic Council. At first, the Council had been excited. New species always brought fresh ideas and resources, but then the evaluation teams had returned with disturbing reports. Humans, they said, were too violent. Their entire history was filled with wars. They fought each other over everything: land, resources, ideas, even invisible concepts they called religion. Most shocking of all, they seemed to enjoy fighting. Other species fought when they had to. Humans appeared to fight because they wanted to. The Council had seen violent species before. The Krexthon were famous warriors, but they fought with honor and rules. The Mordaki were aggressive, but they only fought for territory. Humans seemed to fight for no reason at all, and they were terrifyingly good at it. The decision had been unanimous. Humanity was too dangerous for galactic civilization. They were told to stay in their own solar system and think about their behavior. Maybe in a few hundred years they could apply again. The Council expected the humans to be upset. They expected protests and angry messages. What they got instead was silence. For 6 months, nothing came from human space. The Council congratulated itself on handling a difficult situation peacefully. Then the attacks began. The first incident was at Keltos Prime, Zethkar continued, reading from his datapad with shaking hands. A mining colony with minimal defenses. We assumed it was raiders or pirates. The attack was too precise, too organized for humans. But it had been humans. Security footage showed them clearly. Those strange hairless apes moving through the colony with frightening efficiency. They took nothing. They destroyed nothing unnecessary. They simply eliminated every defensive installation and left a message. This is what rejection feels like. The Council had been angry but not worried. One mining colony was nothing. They sent a patrol fleet to investigate and teach these humans a lesson. The patrol fleet never returned. The second engagement was at Tarius Station, Zethkar said, his voice getting quieter. Admiral Vex-2 commanded 12 heavy cruisers and 36 support vessels. They were our best ships with our most experienced crews. The battle had lasted 4 hours. When it was over, human forces had captured or destroyed every Council ship. Worse, they had broadcast the entire battle across the galaxy. Every species could watch as humanity's crude-looking ships danced around the Council's advanced vessels like predators playing with prey. The Council realized they had made a terrible mistake. These were not primitive warmongers. These were something far more dangerous. Primitive warmongers who were also brilliant at warfare. The humans fight differently than any species we have encountered, Zethkar explained to the increasingly nervous assembly. They do not follow standard tactical patterns. They do not seek honorable combat. They fight to win, using any method that works. The reports from surviving Council forces painted a picture that chilled every species in the chamber. Human ships that appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. Human soldiers who fought to the death rather than surrender, even when surrounded. Human tactics that seemed to predict what the Council would do before the Council knew it themselves. Most disturbing were the psychological aspects. Humans seemed to understand fear in ways other species did not. They used terror as a weapon, not through random violence but through careful demonstration of their capabilities. They would defeat a Council force, then broadcast recordings of the battle to nearby systems. They made sure everyone knew exactly how outmatched they were. The Krexthon warrior poets volunteered to face the humans, Zethkar said, and the chamber fell completely silent. The Krexthon were legendary. They had never lost a significant battle in over 1,000 years. Their combination of artistic soul and warrior spirit made them unbeatable. They had lasted 3 days against humanity. Commander Thalnex survived to make a report, Zethkar continued. He said the humans fought without honor, without beauty, without any of the noble traditions of warfare. They fought like, he paused, struggling with the words, like killing was a job they wanted to finish quickly so they could go home. That was perhaps the most frightening thing about humanity. They were not savage berserkers or honorable warriors. They were professional killers who approached warfare like other species approached manufacturing. They had systems, procedures, and standards. They continuously improved their methods. They treated death and destruction as engineering problems to be solved efficiently. The chamber erupted in nervous chatter as species discussed what they had heard. Some called for immediate negotiation. Others demanded massive military mobilization. A few suggested fleeing to other galaxies entirely. Zethkar raised his forearms for silence. There is more, he said. And the talking stopped immediately. Intelligence reports suggest the humans are not fighting for territory or resources. Captured human soldiers have been interrogated. They all give the same answer when asked about their war goals. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from dozens of species. They say they are teaching us a lesson. The silence that followed was absolute. Every being in the chamber understood the implications. Humans were not trying to conquer the galaxy. They were not seeking wealth or power. They were punishing the council for rejecting them, and they would continue until they decided the lesson was complete. How many systems have we lost? Asked Speaker Veltara of the Zenthari Collective, her melodic voice tight with worry. 17 confirmed, 23 more under attack, Zethkar replied. But the humans are being selective. They target military installations and government facilities. Civilian populations are largely unharmed. This should have been good news, but somehow it made things worse. It showed that humanity could have been committing genocide but chose not to. Their restraint was not mercy. It was contempt. They were demonstrating that they could destroy the council whenever they wanted, but preferred to let them live with the knowledge of their helplessness. What are our options? Asked the representative from Mordak, a species known for their direct approach to problems. Zethkar looked down at his datapad, then back at the assembled council. Military experts believe we cannot win through conventional warfare. The humans adapt too quickly and fight too effectively. Economic sanctions are impossible since they want nothing from us. Diplomatic pressure has failed because they refuse all communication. The chamber filled with the sounds of 847 species contemplating their own extinction. Some made prayer-like gestures. Others began planning evacuation routes. All of them wondered how their advanced civilization had been brought to its knees by a species they had dismissed as too primitive for membership. The age of galactic peace was over. The age of humanity had begun. 6 months had passed since Zethkar's terrifying report, and the situation had only gotten worse. The humans showed no signs of slowing down their attacks. If anything, they seemed to be getting better at warfare with each passing day. Speaker Veltara stood before the emergency assembly, her usually graceful movements jerky with stress. Her people, the Zenthari, were known throughout the galaxy for their wisdom and calm thinking. Today she looked like someone who had not slept in weeks. Fellow council members, she began, her musical voice carrying across the vast chamber. We face a crisis unlike any in our recorded history. The mathematical projections are clear. If humanity continues expanding at their current rate, they will control 1/4 of council space within 5 years. The numbers were devastating. Every week brought new reports of human victories. They had moved beyond simple raids to full military campaigns. Entire star systems were falling under human control, and there seemed to be no way to stop them. The Krexthon Military Academy has completed their analysis, Veltara continued, gesturing toward the section where the proud warrior poets sat. They confirm what we all feared. Humanity possesses military capabilities that exceed our understanding. Commander Thalnex, one of the few surviving Krexthon officers who had faced humans in battle, stood slowly. His once bright armor was dull and scratched. His movements, usually flowing like dance, were stiff and careful. I have fought in 300 battles, Thalnek said, his voice barely above a whisper. I have studied warfare for 2 centuries. I thought I understood combat in all its forms. He paused, looking down at his scarred hands. The humans taught me that I understood nothing. The chamber listened in horrified fascination as Thalnek described human military tactics. They did not fight like any known species. They used deception as naturally as breathing. They attacked from directions that should have been impossible. They turned every advantage against itself. They made us afraid, Thalnek admitted, and several council members gasped. The Krexthon were famous for their fearlessness. Not afraid of death, any warrior can face death. They made us afraid of being helpless. They showed us that all our training, all our honor, all our traditions meant nothing against their methods. Veltara nodded sadly. Similar reports come from every engagement. The humans do not simply defeat our forces, they humiliate them. They demonstrate that our military superiority was an illusion. The reports all followed the same pattern. Human forces would appear with impossible stealth. They would strike with precise timing at exactly the right moment. They would use the Council's own strengths against them, turning advanced technology into weaknesses and experienced tactics into traps. But perhaps most disturbing was how humans treated victory. Other species fought for glory, honor, territory, or resources. Humans seemed to fight for the simple purpose of proving they could win. They took minimal casualties, caused maximum psychological damage, and left behind detailed recordings of their victories for everyone to study. They are teaching the galaxy that we are weak, said the representative from the Korth Dominion, his tentacles writhing with anger. Every species can see these battles. Our authority crumbles with each defeat. This was true and terrible. The Council's power had always been based on the belief that they were the strongest force in the galaxy. If anyone challenged that authority, the Council's military would crush them quickly and efficiently. For 3,000 years, this system had maintained peace. Now every species could watch as humanity made the Council look like children playing at war. Rebellions were starting on dozens of worlds. Pirates grew bolder, knowing the Council's fleets were busy being destroyed by humans. The careful order that had ruled the galaxy was falling apart. Intelligence reports indicate that human strategy has evolved, Veltara continued. They are no longer simply attacking our military installations. They have begun psychological warfare on a galactic scale. The evidence was everywhere. Human forces had started broadcasting their battles live across the galaxy. They provided detailed analysis of Council weaknesses. They offered commentary on tactical failures. Worst of all, they did it all with calm professionalism that made their superiority seem natural and obvious. Some species had started requesting human military advice. Others had quietly begun copying human tactics. A few had even suggested that maybe humanity had been right to reject Council authority, if this was how easily it could be defeated. The economic impacts are becoming severe, reported the trade coordinator, a nervous creature whose species specialized in mathematics. 17 major trade routes have been disrupted. Resource shipments from human-controlled systems have stopped completely. Several key manufacturing worlds are requesting military protection we cannot provide. The galaxy's economy was built on the assumption of peace and security. Ships traveled predictable routes because everyone knew the Council would protect them. Factories operated in vulnerable locations because Council fleets would prevent attacks. Trade agreements were honored because Council authority enforced them. Humanity was proving that Council authority meant nothing. Ships were being captured or destroyed. Factories were being taken over or abandoned. Trade agreements were becoming worthless paper as human forces redrew the map of galactic territory. We must face an uncomfortable truth, Veltara said, her voice heavy with sadness. Traditional military solutions have failed completely. Our greatest warriors, our most advanced ships, our most brilliant strategists, all have proven inadequate against human capabilities. The chamber fell silent as 847 species contemplated this reality. The Council had always been able to solve problems through superior force. They were the strongest, so they made the rules. Anyone who disagreed was crushed quickly enough that others learned not to challenge Council authority. Humanity had made this approach impossible. They could not be crushed. They could not be intimidated. They could not be reasoned with because they refused all communication attempts. Traditional diplomacy, military pressure, and economic leverage had all failed against an enemy that wanted nothing except to prove the Council was powerless. I propose something that has never been attempted in council history, Veltara said, and every representative leaned forward to listen. I propose that we offer unconditional surrender. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Representatives jumped to their feet, shouting in dozens of languages. Some species began threatening to leave the council immediately. Others demanded Veltara be removed from her position for even suggesting such a thing. But gradually, the shouting died down as the mathematics became clear. Unconditional surrender was horrible, but extinction was worse. We will offer humanity everything, Veltara continued once order was restored. Full council membership with senior status. Territorial concessions that acknowledge their military conquests. Access to all council technology and resources. Seats on the high command with veto power over military decisions. The terms were unprecedented. Humanity would essentially become the ruling power in the galaxy, with authority over species that had existed for millions of years before humans had even developed space travel. They will have everything they could possibly want, Veltara said. Territory, resources, technology, authority. We will acknowledge their superiority in exchange for an end to hostilities. It was the most complete surrender in galactic history. The Council would be admitting that everything they had believed about civilization, authority, and power was wrong. They would be accepting that a species they had rejected as too primitive was actually more advanced than all of them combined. When do we make this offer? Asked the representative from Kelos, a practical species that preferred clear solutions to complex problems. Immediately, Veltara replied. Every day we delay, humanity grows stronger and we grow weaker. If we are going to surrender, we should do it while we still have something left to surrender with. The vote was unanimous, not because every species agreed with the decision, but because every species understood the alternative. They could offer humanity everything they wanted, or they could wait for humanity to take everything anyway. As the session ended, representatives began the humiliating process of preparing surrender documents. They would offer the galaxy's most violent rejects complete control over galactic civilization. They could only hope humanity would be merciful enough to accept. The Great Chamber of the Galactic Council had been redesigned for this historic moment. Security screens that had never been needed before now protected the representatives. Armed guards from a dozen species stood ready for any threat. The Council was taking no chances with the first human to enter these halls in over 2 years. Ambassador Sarah Chen walked through the massive doors with quiet confidence. She was smaller than most beings in the chamber, but somehow her presence filled the entire space. Her simple black diplomatic suit was plain compared to the elaborate robes and ceremonial armor worn by alien representatives, yet she commanded attention without effort. Every eye in the chamber followed her as she moved to the center platform. Some species whispered to each other in languages that sounded like music or clicking or humming. Others sat in complete silence, studying this representative of the galaxy's most dangerous species. Sarah looked around the chamber calmly, taking in the sight of nearly 1,000 different alien beings. Her expression showed no fear, no awe, no concern. She looked like someone attending a routine business meeting rather than a historic peace negotiation. Honored representatives, Speaker Veltara began, her musical voice carrying clearly through the vast space. We welcome Ambassador Chen as our guest under ancient protocols of diplomatic immunity. Sarah nodded politely but said nothing. Her silence was more unsettling than any threat could have been. We have requested this meeting to discuss ending hostilities between humanity and the Galactic Council. Veltara continued. We believe a peaceful solution can benefit all parties. The formal presentation began with detailed charts and projections. Council economists showed how human-controlled territory could be integrated into the galactic economy. Military coordinators explained how human forces could work alongside Council fleets. Political theorists outlined how humanity could take their place as senior partners in galactic government. The offer was everything Veltara had promised. Complete Council membership with voting rights equal to the 5 founding species. Recognition of all human territorial conquest. Access to advanced technology that could advance human civilization by centuries. Trade agreements that would make Earth the economic center of known space. Most importantly, humanity would be given seats on the high command, with authority over military decisions throughout the galaxy. They would become the acknowledged leaders of galactic civilization. with power over species that had ruled star systems when Earth was still covered in ice. These terms represent unprecedented concessions, Veltara explained as the presentation concluded. Never in Council history have we offered such complete integration to any species. We recognize humanity's superior military capabilities and wish to end this conflict through mutual cooperation. Sarah listened to everything with polite attention. She asked no questions during the presentation. She made no comments about the terms being offered. She simply stood quietly, occasionally glancing around the chamber at the hundreds of aliens waiting for her response. When the presentation ended, the chamber fell completely silent. 847 different species waited to hear whether humanity would accept the greatest surrender offer in galactic history. Sarah looked directly at Speaker Veltara and smiled slightly. "No," she said. The single word hit the chamber like a physical blow. Representatives began talking all at once, their voices mixing into a chaos of confusion and disbelief. Some demanded that Sarah explain herself. Others insisted she had not understood the terms. A few began calculating how quickly they could evacuate their home systems. "Order," Veltara called, and gradually the chamber quieted. "Ambassador Chen, perhaps you would like clarification on any aspect of our offer?" "I understood perfectly," Sarah replied, her voice calm and clear. "You are offering humanity everything we could possibly want in exchange for ending our military campaign against the Council. The terms are very generous. Then why do you refuse?" asked the representative from the Krexthon, his warrior's pride clearly wounded by the rejection. Sarah turned to face him directly. "Because we do not want anything you are offering." The confusion in the chamber was absolute. Every species in galactic history had wanted something: territory, resources, technology, power, recognition. The Council had built their entire civilization on the assumption that conflicts could be resolved by finding the right price. "Every thinking being wants something," insisted the trade coordinator. "Territory for expansion, resources for development, technology for advancement. What does humanity want? We want you to understand what you did wrong," Sarah answered simply. The chamber erupted again as representatives tried to make sense of this answer. The Korth Dominion's representative waved his tentacles angrily. "We acknowledged our mistake in rejecting humanity. We are offering complete acceptance and senior partnership." "You still do not understand," Sarah said, and her quiet voice somehow cut through all the noise. "You rejected us because you thought we were too violent for civilized society. You believed that peaceful species were superior to warlike ones. You assumed that your way of governing the galaxy was the only correct way." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Your offer proves that you have learned nothing. You still believe that conflicts can be resolved through negotiation and compromise. You still think that everyone wants the same things you want. You still assume that your civilization is worth joining." Veltara's musical voice was strained when she spoke. "What would convince humanity to end hostilities?" "Nothing," Sarah replied, "because ending hostilities was never our goal." The silence that followed was different from before. This was not confusion or disbelief. This was the dawning realization that humanity was not fighting a war in any sense the Council understood. "Then what is your goal?" asked Commander Thalnex, his warrior's training making him focus on understanding his enemy. Sarah smiled again, but there was no warmth in it. "We are teaching you what civilization actually means. You built your society on the belief that you were strong enough to enforce your rules on everyone else. You maintained peace by threatening violence against anyone who disagreed with you. You called this civilization." She gestured around the chamber. "Look at yourselves now. Your fleets are scattered. Your authority is crumbling. Your member species are starting to question whether Council rule is worth the protection it provides. You are learning that your civilization was built on an illusion." The representatives listened in growing horror as Sarah continued. "You rejected us because we were too honest about what we are. We told you that humans fight wars. We showed you our history of violence. We admitted that we enjoy competition and conflict. You decided this made us unfit for your peaceful society. But your peaceful society was only possible because you had the biggest guns," Sarah said, her voice getting colder. "When someone bigger and stronger came along, your peaceful civilization collapsed in months. You were never peaceful. You were just weak." The chamber was dead silent now. Every being present understood what Sarah was saying, and the implications were terrifying. "True civilization is not built on enforced peace," Sarah continued. It is built on the understanding that everyone has the capacity for violence, and everyone chooses not to use it except when necessary. You never learned this lesson because you never faced anyone who could challenge your authority. She looked around the chamber one more time. We are teaching you what it means to be truly civilized. When you understand that lesson, when you can build a society based on mutual respect rather than superior firepower, then we might consider talking about peace. How long will this lesson take? Veltara asked desperately. Sarah shrugged. That depends on how quickly you learn. Some students are faster than others. With that, she turned and walked toward the chamber doors. No one tried to stop her. No one called out additional offers or threats. They all understood that humanity was not interested in anything the council could give them. As the doors closed behind her, 847 species sat in stunned silence, contemplating the possibility that their entire civilization had been built on a lie. The lesson was just beginning. 3 months after Sarah Chen's devastating rejection, the galaxy was learning exactly what humanity meant by education. The human war machine had not slowed down after refusing peace. Instead, it had evolved into something that chilled the council to its core. The attacks continued, but now they followed patterns that seemed designed to teach specific lessons rather than achieve quick victory. Human fleets would arrive at council worlds, demonstrate their complete superiority, and then withdraw after making their point. They were not interested in conquest anymore. They were interested in demonstration. Admiral Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the human dreadnought Prometheus, watching as another council fleet prepared to defend the industrial world of Kepler-7. The alien ships formed neat defensive formations around the planet, their crews undoubtedly hoping that superior numbers would somehow matter this time. Analysis complete. Admiral, reported the tactical officer. 43 council vessels of various classes. Standard defensive formation. They are broadcasting surrender offers on all frequencies. Rodriguez nodded without surprise. Council fleets had started offering surrender before battles even began. It was a smart tactical decision that showed they were finally learning to think practically, rather than honorably. Ignore the surrender offers, Rodriguez ordered. Begin demonstration pattern 7 Alpha. The human fleet moved with precision that would have impressed even the Krexthon in their glory days. Ships that had been invisible to sensors suddenly appeared throughout the council formation. Weapons that the aliens had never seen before began surgically disabling their vessels without destroying them. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted exactly 17 minutes. When it was over, every council ship was dead in space but intact. Their crews were alive but helpless. Most importantly, everything had been recorded from multiple angles and broadcast live across the galaxy. Open a channel to the disabled fleet, Rodriguez ordered. The face of Admiral Korthtan, a veteran Zenthari officer, appeared on the main screen. His usual composure was gone, replaced by the hollow expression of someone who had just watched everything he believed proven wrong. Admiral Korthtan, Rodriguez said politely. I trust your crews are uninjured? Most are, Korthtan replied quietly. Why did you not destroy us? We were helpless. Because destroying you was never the point, Rodriguez explained. You defended this system because you believed it was your duty. Your crews fought bravely despite knowing they would lose. That shows character worth preserving. Rodriguez gestured toward the planet below them. Your government, however, needs to learn a different lesson. The real demonstration began with surgical strikes on the planetary government complex. Human forces moved through the buildings with impossible precision, capturing key officials while leaving everyone else untouched. Within hours, the entire planetary leadership was in human custody, but the captured officials were not harmed. Instead, they were brought before cameras and given a choice. They could continue serving as government leaders under council authority, or they could watch recordings of what happened to other worlds that had made the same choice. The recordings were devastating. Planet after planet, the same pattern repeated. Council forces would arrive to defend a world. Human forces would demonstrate their superiority. The planetary government would be given the same choice. Those who chose to continue serving the council found their authority simply ignored by their own people. The lesson is simple. Rodriguez explained to the captured officials as they watched their colleagues on other worlds lose control of their populations. Authority based on superior force only works as long as you have the most force. When someone stronger comes along, that authority disappears. The officials were released unharmed, but their world was never the same. The population had watched their government prove helpless against human forces. They had seen their military commanders surrender without achieving anything. Most importantly, they had been shown that council authority was an illusion. Within days, Kepler-7 declared independence from the council. Its government announced they would make their own decisions about trade, defense, and diplomacy. Similar declarations were spreading across the galaxy as world after world realized they did not need council permission to govern themselves. But humanity's educational program was not limited to military demonstrations. Human diplomatic teams began approaching species that had been marginalized by the council's rigid hierarchy. These were worlds that had resources the council wanted but little political influence. Ambassador Martinez sat across from the representative of the Yolkar Confederation, a small alliance of mining worlds that had been forced to sell their rare metals to the council at below-market prices for over a century. "We understand you have been experiencing difficulties with your current trade arrangements," Martinez said. "Diplomatically, the council sets our prices and takes 70% of our production," the Yolkar representative replied bitterly. "We have no choice. They control the shipping routes and the military protection we need." "What if that were no longer true?" Martinez asked. The conversation that followed was carefully recorded and broadcast throughout the galaxy. Martinez explained how human forces could provide protection for independent worlds. Human ships could guarantee safe passage for trade vessels. Human technology could help smaller species develop their own defensive capabilities. The offer was simple: join humanity in reshaping the galaxy's power structure, and receive the support needed to stand as equals rather than subjects. The response was overwhelming. Species that had been subjugated for centuries suddenly found themselves with the backing of the galaxy's most powerful military force. Old grievances that had been suppressed by council authority exploded into open rebellion. The Mordaki clans, who had been forced to limit their territorial expansion by council decree, suddenly found human advisors helping them plan campaigns against neighboring council loyalists. The Tecton Collective, whose resource-rich worlds had been taxed into poverty, received human assistance in seizing control of their own mining operations. Most shocking of all, humanity began recruiting from council military forces themselves. Human officers approached captured alien soldiers with an offer that many found impossible to refuse. "Your government sent you to die for a cause they do not believe in," Captain Thompson explained to a group of captured Krexthon warriors. "They knew you could not win. They sent you anyway because they needed to be seen doing something." The warriors listened in silence as Thompson continued. "Humanity offers a different path. Fight for something worth fighting for. Help us teach the galaxy what real strength looks like. Show your people that honor comes from choosing your battles, not from dying in hopeless ones." Some of the captured warriors accepted the offer. They joined human forces as advisors and trainers, teaching alien species how to fight effectively against council forces. Their presence in human ranks sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The psychological impact was devastating. Council worlds could no longer trust their own military forces. Species that had been loyal for millennia began questioning whether that loyalty was deserved. The careful hierarchy that had maintained galactic order for thousands of years was crumbling as humanity demonstrated that it had always been built on fear rather than respect. News reports from across the galaxy painted the same picture. Council authority was disappearing not through military conquest but through simple demonstration of its weakness. World after world was declaring independence. Trade networks were reorganizing around human-protected routes. Former council territories were forming new alliances based on mutual benefit rather than imposed hierarchy. The most telling sign was what happened to council fleets. Rather than fighting hopeless battles, more and more ships were simply deserting. Crews would disable their communications and navigation systems, then request asylum from human forces. They preferred the uncertainty of life under human protection to the certainty of death defending a system they no longer believed in. Admiral Rodriguez watched the latest intelligence reports with satisfaction. The lesson was being learned exactly as humanity had planned. The galaxy was discovering that real civilization could not be imposed from above. It had to be built from mutual respect and voluntary cooperation. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "we are receiving surrender requests from 17 different council fleets. They are requesting permission to join human forces as allied units. Rodriguez smiled. The Council had taught the galaxy that civilization meant submission to superior authority. Humanity was teaching them that true civilization meant choosing your own path and accepting the consequences of that choice. The educational program was working perfectly. 2 years had passed since humanity rejected the Council's desperate peace offer. The great chamber that had once housed representatives from 847 species now held only a handful of delegates from the most stubborn Council loyalists. The walls that had echoed with debates about galactic policy now witnessed the formal dissolution of the oldest government in known space. Speaker Veltara stood alone at the central podium, her once graceful movements now showing the weight of defeat. Her musical voice, which had guided council sessions for decades, was barely above a whisper as she read the final proclamation. By unanimous vote of the remaining member species, she announced to the nearly empty chamber, the Galactic Council hereby dissolves all governmental authority and releases all member worlds from their obligations under Council law. The few remaining representatives sat in silence. Some stared at their hands. Others looked around the vast chamber, perhaps remembering when it had been filled with the voices of 1,000 different worlds. All of them understood that they were witnessing the end of an era that had lasted 3 millennia. Admiral Chen entered through the main doors as Veltara finished reading the dissolution decree. She was Sarah Chen's daughter, now grown into a position of command that reflected humanity's dominant role in galactic affairs. Her presence was calm and respectful, but there was no doubt about who held real authority in this room. Speaker Veltara, Admiral Chen said formally, the United Earth Authority acknowledges the Council's dissolution and thanks you for your service to galactic civilization. Veltara looked up with tired eyes. Have we learned our lesson, Admiral? Are you satisfied with the education you have provided? Admiral Chen smiled slightly. The lesson was never about satisfaction. It was about understanding. And yes, I believe the galaxy has learned what it needed to know. The lesson had indeed been thorough. Across the galaxy, the old order had been completely replaced by something that would have been unimaginable under Council rule. Former Council worlds now governed themselves, forming voluntary alliances based on shared interests rather than imposed authority. The Mordecai clans had established their own confederation, with human advisors helping them develop defensive pacts with neighboring species. The Yulkar mining worlds had formed an independent trade union, selling their resources at fair market prices to any buyer who could guarantee safe transport. Even the proud Krexthon had abandoned their warrior poet traditions in favor of what they called practical honor, fighting only for causes worth dying for. Most remarkably, the galaxy was more peaceful than it had been under Council rule. Without a central authority to rebel against, species focused on building relationships with their neighbors. Trade disputes were resolved through negotiation rather than military intervention. Territorial conflicts were settled by mutual agreement rather than imposed arbitration. The old system maintained peace through fear, Admiral Chen explained to the assembled delegates. Species behaved peacefully because they were afraid of Council retaliation. When that fear was removed, everyone expected chaos. Instead, we discovered that most species prefer cooperation to conflict when given a genuine choice. The transformation had not been without violence. Some worlds had tried to establish their own mini-empires, using Council military equipment to conquer their neighbors. These attempts had been dealt with swiftly and decisively by human forces, but the interventions were limited and surgical. Humanity did not seek to replace Council authority with their own. They simply prevented anyone else from trying to rebuild the old system. What happens now? Asked the representative from Kelos, one of the few species that had remained loyal to the Council until the very end. Now you govern yourselves, Admiral Chen replied. You make your own decisions about trade, defense, and diplomacy. You succeed or fail based on your own choices rather than Council protection or Council restrictions. The concept was still difficult for many species to understand. 3,000 years of Council rule had created generations that had never needed to think for themselves about major decisions. The Council had set trade routes, resolved disputes, and provided protection. Now all of that was gone, replaced by the necessity of taking responsibility for their own survival. And if we make poor choices? Veltara asked. If we fail to maintain peace without Council authority? Then you will learn from those failures, Admiral Chen said simply. That is how real civilization develops. Through trial and error, success and failure, learning and adaptation, the Council prevented that learning by removing consequences from poor decisions. The galaxy was already adapting to this new reality. Species that had been enemies under Council rule were discovering they had more in common than they had realized. The Tecton Collective and the Korth Dominion had signed mutual defense agreements despite centuries of territorial disputes. The Zenthari were sharing their philosophical insights with species they had previously considered intellectually inferior. Trade was flourishing without Council restrictions. Innovation was accelerating without Council regulations. Most importantly, conflicts were being resolved through genuine negotiation rather than imposed solutions. What about humanity? Asked Commander Thalnex, who had remained as one of the few Krexthon representatives. Will you assume Council authority over the galaxy? Admiral Chen shook her head. Humanity never wanted to rule the galaxy. We wanted to prove that the galaxy did not need rulers. The lesson is complete. This was perhaps the most shocking aspect of humanity's victory. They had gained the power to control galactic civilization, and they were choosing to walk away from it. Earth was withdrawing from most galactic affairs, maintaining only minimal contact with other species. We will continue to monitor the situation, Admiral Chen explained. If any species attempts to recreate the Council's mistakes, if anyone tries to impose their authority on others through superior force, we will intervene. But beyond that, you are free to determine your own destiny. The few remaining delegates struggled to process this information. Every species in galactic history had sought power and authority. The concept of gaining ultimate power and then voluntarily giving it up was almost incomprehensible. Why? Veltara asked. Why go through all of this just to abandon the power you have won? Admiral Chen considered the question carefully. Because power that must be maintained through force is not real power. True authority comes from respect and voluntary cooperation. The Council never understood this distinction. She gestured around the empty chamber. This room once held representatives from nearly 1,000 worlds, all forced to attend by Council authority. Today, those same worlds are working together by choice, without any central authority compelling them to cooperate. Which system do you think is stronger? The answer was obvious. The voluntary alliances and trade networks that had replaced Council authority were more stable and productive than the old system had ever been. Species that cooperated by choice were more reliable, partners than those who cooperated from fear. The galaxy has learned that civilization is not something that can be imposed from outside, Admiral Chen continued. It must be chosen by each individual and each species. The Council tried to create civilization through rules and regulations. Real civilization comes from understanding that everyone benefits when everyone prospers. As the formal ceremony concluded, the remaining delegates began making arrangements to return to their home worlds. Some would report to governments that had already declared independence. Others would help their species adapt to the new reality of self-governance. Admiral Chen remained behind as the chamber emptied. Looking around at the empty seats that had once held the most powerful beings in the galaxy, the silence was profound, but it was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of completion. Earth had never sought to conquer the galaxy. They had sought to liberate it from the illusion that peace could be maintained through superior force. The lesson was complete, and the student had graduated. Humanity withdrew to their home system, leaving behind a galaxy that was learning to govern itself. They maintained defensive capabilities that ensured no single species could dominate the others, but beyond that, they allowed galactic civilization to develop naturally. The age of imposed authority was over. The age of chosen cooperation had begun, and in the empty chamber where the Galactic Council had once ruled through fear, a new kind of civilization was taking its first steps toward genuine peace.